We are going to get started. So, good evening to our Columbia community. How is everybody this evening? Thank you so much for joining us. It is a true pleasure to welcome you all tonight. I am Nancy Peck, proud alumna of Columbia College, class of 1990, and Columbia Business School, class of 1995. I am very honored to serve as president of Columbia College Women, the official alumni organization of the college. I'm really pleased to welcome you tonight to CCW's annual signature event for 2025, themed A View from the Top, Women Navigating Leadership and Change. Tonight, we embark on an amazing journey to explore the summit of leadership. This gathering brings together trailblazing alumni, each a beacon in her respective field, as they share invaluable insights on steering their organizations through the ever-evolving landscapes of culture, society, and global events. Their powerful stories of resilience and pivotal moments that shape their lives and careers will undoubtedly inspire and motivate all of us. It is very heartening and humbling to see so many alumni, students, and guests come together this evening as part of a positive and supportive community, celebrating and lifting up the voices and efforts of our Columbia community is the reason I wanted to be a part of Columbia College Women. Thank you all for being here and engaging with each other. This evening's event is sponsored by Columbia College Women, and CCW is dedicated to amplifying the voices and leadership of women at Columbia College and across the university. We're committed to nurturing a vibrant community that supports alumni and current students throughout their lives. A testament to this commitment is the Columbia College Women's Scholarship, which funds the education of for two or more outstanding students each year. It was established in 2009 through a partnership with the Columbia College Fund and Columbia College Women. The scholarship is awarded to any Columbia College student who is interested in women's studies or women's rights. And to date, we have funded 18 students. I invite you to consider supporting this grassroots effort as part of your annual giving, as every contribution makes a meaningful difference. I wish to extend a heartfelt thank you to those who have generously donated to Columbia College Women's Scholarship. We're truly grateful for your support, and I encourage you to continue championing our cause through giving and to spread the word to your fellow alumni, family, and friends to donate and support our students. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for the evening, Stacie Hoffmeister, Columbia College, class of 1996. Stacie has led people and cultural initiatives as managing director at Morgan Stanley Wealth Management. There, she has hosted a groundbreaking podcast series, Come In, Let's Talk, speaking with Morgan Stanley's most senior women, sharing candid conversations about what it's like to be among the top women on Wall Street. Each guest episode is full of lessons and personal stories, a prime reason we're so excited that she's leading tonight's conversation with us. Stacie was also the founder of Facts and Heresies, a coaching firm dedicated to delivering customized leadership programs for Fortune 500 clients such as Morgan Stanley, Google, JP Morgan, Bobbi Brown Cosmetics, and S&P Communications. Stacie earned a bachelor's in English literature from Columbia College and a master's at NYU's Stern School of Business. Please join me in welcoming Stacie to the stage. Actually, Stacie is on the stage. Thank you. Thank you, Stacie, for moderating. Over to you, Stacie, and yes.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
It is wonderful to see all of you. And I wanted to, before I introduce our distinguished panelists on stage, just take a moment to welcome all of you to such a sacred space as this, and to tell you a bit about our why we're here and why we're taking time for this. First, it's to really bring to you our gifts of knowledge, whatever they may be, to share with you what took us years and years and years to learn, and to be generous and to offer you any insight that you may find. So please dig in, be present, and we will absolutely have time at the end. We will try to save some time for Q&A, but should the conversation be so rich and time does not allow, there will be time during the cocktail hour for you to engage with us. We'll all be here after. So please don't be shy and please engage with us because we're here to give to you. The other is to demonstrate human-centered leadership. We're here to be vulnerable. We're here to be real with you. So that's important for each of us. So please hold us to that. And we're here to lift up communities. While this is a women's event, we know that when we lift up one group, it benefits more than just one group. There's a halo effect to communities. So we're here to benefit all. Let's move on to our distinguished panelists and introducing it. So I'm going to start with Dolores. Dolores, if you could wave so people know who you are. So Dolores Fernandez Alonso is CC89, and she's the president and CEO of South Florida PBS. She is one of the first women at PBS to have led a merger when WPBT in Miami and WXEL in West Palm Beach combined to become South Florida PBS, representing the 7th largest TV market in the United States. She also launched a sister station, the Health Channel, the nation's first TV channel dedicated to health and medicine 24/7. South Florida PBS Kids presents children's programming on digital platforms. Dolores serves on numerous boards, including PBS, America's Public Television Stations, Florida Public Media, and the Black Archives History and Research Foundation of South Florida, which preserves the legacies of Miami's Black community. Dolores began her television career at ABC News in New York a year after graduating from Columbia with a bachelor's in Spanish literature. She'd go on to receive her MBA at the University of Miami. Is Maryam Banikarim. Wait, so we know who was Maryam. And Maryam is Barnard 89, as well as SEPA in the business school 93. She has been chief marketing officer at Nextdoor, Hyatt, NBC Universal, Gannett, and Univision. She most recently, she ran Fortune's most powerful women in brainstorm tech franchises. During the pandemic, she co-founded NYCNext, which produced pop-up events designed to bring joy to and celebrate New York City, including a moment for Broadway and the Emmy-winning video, New York State of Mind, featuring more than 24 stars performing Billy Joel's classic. It also involved fellow Columbia alumni Tom Kitt and Andy Lerner, likes of Brian Stokes Mitchell singing on Columbia steps, Miss Peppermint on Revson Plaza, and Suzanne Vega at Tom's Diner. Is Tom's Diner still around?
Yeah.
Awesome. Today, Maryam and friends are focused on the Longest Table, a free community event that brings together people for a shared meal and conversation. Maryam is a trustee at Barnard College and a recipient of the Columbia Alumni Medal. Welcome, Maryam. We have Joyce Chang, DC 86, and she is a chair of global research at JP Morgan, which she joined in 1999, and she leads a department of more than 900 members. Barron's just honored her again amongst its 100 most influential women in U.S. finance in 2025. The American Banker has also named her among its 25 most powerful women in finance during the past 2 decades. She is also an inductee in the Fixed Income Analyst Society Hall of Fame. After earning her master's in international development at Princeton, She worked as an emerging market strategist and became a managing director at Merrill Lynch and Salomon Brothers before joining JP Morgan. At Columbia, where Joyce majored in history, she is a member of the History Department's Board of Visitors. She was on Columbia College's Board of Visitors from 2016 to is a board member of the Asian Columbia Alumni Association and is a John Jay Award honoree. Welcome, Joyce. And to my right is Stefanie Tsen Ward, the Columbia College 02. Stefanie's had a career of more than 20 years driving growth in retail, digital, and consumer products. Most recently with a dual role as the Chief Customer and Retail Officer of Neiman Marcus, which she left just last month. She played a key role in transforming Neiman Marcus's $4.5 billion multi-channel business, culminating in the company's 2024 acquisition by Hudson's Bay Company. She developed an integrated strategy across stores and businesses across 41 locations, as well as on digital platforms. Stefanie previously was a vice president head of Canada at Louis Vuitton and a vice president at Sephora, overseeing customer experience. She began her career after graduation as an investment banking analyst at Merrill Lynch, and then as a marketing manager at Time, before she pursued her MBA at Harvard. Stefanie earned her bachelor's at Columbia in psychology and economics. She joins us from Dallas. So I've done a lot of talking. I'm going to need a sip of water, actually. So I'm going to hand it off to you all for a quick icebreaker and to get you guys to start talking. And my first question to each of you is I want to take you back in a time machine to your years at the university and tell us about what was a formative or very poignant class for you. It doesn't have to be your most favorite because that's just too hard to answer because so many were so good. But let's just say a favorite, a poignant, a formative class for each of you.
Sure. Oh, perfect. I do feel like it's a good time capsule to come back to campus. So lovely to see everyone's faces. The class that I didn't realize how much value it had was a professor named Carol Dweck. She's not here anymore, but she had the concept of educational psychology. It was to satisfy one of my psychology requirements. But she had a whole study around mindset, growth mindset. So maybe some of you had heard, and she had a book called Mindset. And she wasn't Carol Dweck with this whole mindset taught from them, but I had her class for a whole semester. And to this day, whether it's raising my toddler children of 5 and 2 or raising 6,000 employees, growth mindset is so applicable for myself and for everyone around me. So never knew that.
So hi everyone, great to be here. Michael Sugrue was who I had for contemporary civilizations. And I remember for the core, I was like, I don't want to take the core. This is ridiculous. And then I took that class and it took me into a whole other world that I really love. And what you will find when you graduate, or some of you have already graduated, is it ties you together. It's something that you talk about. It's what did you take? And it's something that we all can connect on. And it gets more important as you get older. So it's really useful.
So my favorite classes were in the history department, where I am on the board. But I remember the first year they introduced, introduction to women's studies. But the American history classes, I remember doing the Ken Jackson midnight history tour, right, all through Manhattan. And Walter Metzger was my favorite one. He used to sing labor union songs in class. But the history department here had just a really profound impact on me, and is still one that I'm really involved with.
Okay, so not my favorite, but definitely one I reference a lot. I liked it, don't get me wrong. It was Leslie Kalman's class, Personality and Politics, where we studied personalities, political figures and transformative movements that sometimes were really based on an environmental factor that really transformed them into the leaders that they became, like Woodrow Wilson, Mandela, things like that. And that's actually something I thought about a lot and often actually come back to because I tried to manufacture that experience for myself. Doesn't really work.
And here, thank you for remembering the professors as well. That's very, very impressive. It's art humanities. And I just don't remember the professor, so I'm having a little bit of shame about that right now. But I had not been exposed to art at all, visual art growing up, and that class just opened my mind. And I remember taking my kids in strollers to MoMA and to the Met as a result of that class to make sure that they grew up knowing art. Now let's take that idea of experiences of influence and pivotal moments and bridge that to your careers. Each of you is a leader and has earned that title. And I'd like for you to think about a pivotal moment that helped you get there. And it could be a moment of joy, it could have been a moment of challenge. But I'd like for each of you to recall that moment, that pivot point in your career that shaped your journey since graduation, and tell us a bit about that and how that helped you become the leader that you are today. And Stefanie, we'll start with you, and then after that, we'll just fill in.
Sure. I'll tell you the pivotal moment, but I think the theme that emerged from it is that there is no silver bullet and there is no linear path. And it's something where I think growing up, going through college, and you kind of like first year, second year, third year, fourth year, you finish 4 years here, everything is so blocked. And when I joined investment banking, I also was like, I'll be a second year analyst or a third year analyst. Maybe I'll be an associate. There's a very linear path I thought that would just unfold itself as I had through all my upbringing. And really 15 months after I graduated, joined investment banking. Maybe Joyce, I should have worked with you and would have felt better about my life then. But I hated it. I hated that job so much, and it was a terrible time. And it was the first time in my life that I quit. And I had never quit. I mean, we are all Columbia College women. We are all types of personalities. What is quitting? And I quit, and I felt so ashamed, and I felt awful, and I felt like such a loser. But I'm so happy that happened earlier, Mike. But that shape for me later is understanding that there is no linear path, and that experiencing that type of decision only makes you stronger, and then taught me to be a stronger leader because I knew others would also have to go through it in a safe space so that you can grow, so that you can learn. And so that was hugely first quitting moment, but also a moment that taught me to think differently about decisions and led me to at one point in my career then actually taking a demotion to learn something different. I'm now taking a sabbatical, so I've also been like, take some time. My kids are young, and we're going to do the family thing, and then I'll get back into the workforce. It's me, just all those things and anything else in between that brings to life. Just a little bit more at ease of embracing. Never makes a moment easier, but you just have a different mindset. Really approaching all of that. So at that point in time, but
I hear in that one of the follow-up questions to that is, when you see an obstacle, what do you do? How do you deal with that? And I hear in that while things may not have turned out the way you wanted them to, and you had feelings about it that weren't always positive, you did employ that growth mindset and made the best of it and made a decision that ultimately worked out for you and that taught you, built you.
And I think that women, and know many of us feel that, such self-critics, right? Like you go through something and the immediate thing you start all this in your mind, and it is about taking that moment. And in the moment, it still may not be easy. There'll still be challenges, but with every single moment that may come about, for me, it just gave me a different perspective because you kind of build a muscle memory around, I can get through this. This is not going to be the end. There is a way out. There's always a way. And it may not be a linear way, and that's okay. And the messier it is, actually, the more fun it is. Because then they become stories, and stories that I can now share with everyone to make everyone else feel like there isn't some perfect path, perfect. There isn't that. And it's like perfect, but there isn't the actual perfection to be defined.
So resonates with me. So the day before I was going to get voted the second time to be president of South Florida PBS, the first time, the second time. the chair of the board came to me and said, call him off. Exactly what happened. And I said, call him. Because that women's network that you're part of, I can't go to the dry cleaner. I can't go to a chamber of commerce meeting. Everywhere I go, they keep telling me that you need to be president. And of course, I said to him, I was like, well, are you going to make me president? Yeah, probably. I'm like, then I'll call him off then. And they voted me in the next day. So one of the networks and how important it is, what you all are doing right now, I really applaud you, is it's a women's network, and I'm still part of it, that helps women that are right before the CEO level. It helps them and really lobbies on their behalf to get them into the suite. You need help. You can't do it on your own. So you really got to get by with help you to find. And it's a hard lesson to learn. I know we're all independent and do our own thing, but you need your network. You really do. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so my pivotal moment was my first Wall Street business trip overseas as a research analyst. And I ended up on Wall Street by accident. I was a history major here. I made fun of people on Wall Street. I didn't do finance or math. I had to go to remedial math camp, to make up for it. And I sort of by accident was on Wall Street. But this was back in the days where I started as an emerging markets analyst, but it was third world, less developed country. It's gone back to being called the global South. And so I was, tasked with writing the first reports at the start of globalization. We're kind of at the end of it now, to explain these countries and why they were investable to everyone. And so that means I want to look at your numbers. I'm going to write whether we're overweight, neutral, or underweight, or whether we have a recommendation. And so I was sent to Mexico. And I just remember the absolute look of dismay. They're sending some Chinese girl in her 20s to write about my country, and asking me to look at the numbers. At that point, they only reported them 3 times a year. And she's going to write a report and put out a recommendation. And, there was nobody my age. There was no other woman. And there was certainly no one who was Asian American. And then nobody understood what Asian American was. Are you Chinese? Like, who are you? What are you? And I realized a couple of things. I had to really learn how to turn a disadvantage into an advantage. So you've got to be over-prepared. So if I said something that was average, people would think I was stupid. If I said something that was smart, people would remember that. I remember saying that, look, you need to make yourself speak up twice so that people don't think that the first time is a fluke. Take things like I think out of your vocabulary, because everybody knows you think. And you cannot have somebody say, I can't hear you. You have to speak up. And I say this to all the Asian women, like if I have to say in a meeting, I cannot physically hear your voice, you're already done. So I think the important thing was just to learn how to turn something that could be a real disadvantage into an advantage.
I love hearing about everybody's pivotal moments, and I'm going last, so I've been thinking like, what is my pivotal moment? And it's actually really hard to tell you because I feel like I've had like 100 pivotal moments. I probably have had 80 jobs, so I was different than most people my age in that I switched jobs when they didn't sort of fit my criteria. So I had a lot of pivotal moments, but I'm trying to think of one that would be helpful or build on some of the other ones that people have shared. One is I had my first child, and I was now doing consulting. I took a job that really didn't pan out, and I got paid out for a couple months to leave when they shut down the department. At this point, I'd already had 5 jobs since business school, so that was a lot. And I was pregnant, and so I had thought, like, what am I going to do? Nobody's going to hire me because now they sort of labeled you as a job switcher. So I'd started a bag business and was doing consulting on the side. And a woman, I got introduced to a woman. This was kind of in the heyday of the internet. And somebody said, would you take this meeting? So I took a meeting. She was a half an hour late for dinner. My husband, who also went to Columbia, would have left after 15 minutes. So, I was the person who stayed in the restaurant awkwardly waiting. She came and she said, I after a couple minutes, she said, would you come and interview with me at Citibank? And I had tried investment banking and was miserable. So I was like, no, I'm definitely not doing finance. And she then was like, well, what are you doing? I said, I'm doing this bag business. She said, well, can I invest in the bag business? I found the whole thing very confusing. I was 8 months pregnant. She barely knew me. I was like, why would you want to invest in my bag business? Anyway, so I went home and she would call me every Sunday. And I don't even know why, but she would call me every Sunday. And she was so convincing. I went into Citibank and I interviewed, and people were very confused because I was a 9-month pregnant woman interviewed. And they actually said really terrible things about the culture. So the whole thing was like, oh, yeah, that sounds appealing. So she switches and goes to become the president of global marketing at Bacardi. And she calls me up again on a Sunday and she says, would you come and work for me here in DC? I said, well, I'm definitely not moving. And my sister, who had been also a Barnard alum, she had gone into consulting after at Barnard. She said to me, who's this crazy woman who calls you every Sunday? And I had a newborn actually at the house. And she said, you know what? They charge me out at a crazy rate at my consulting firm. She just graduated, right? I think they charge her out like $1,000 a day or something. I mean, she got a fraction of that, but it's still a lot of money for a recent college graduate. She said, just throw out some crazy day rate and she'll go away. And so, literally like that Sunday, the phone rings and she says, well, what if you come and do some consulting for me in DC? And I said, I mean, honestly, I don't even know where these words came from. I said, you know what? I'm really expensive. And she said, well, how much are you? And I said, $2,000 a day. She said, can you start on Monday? That exchange transformed. I worked for her. And then when she would leave the job, they would keep me on. I got paid $2,000 a day, 3 days a week for 5 years, doing consulting for her and other projects like that. And my husband was so confused because he was at a startup. And so I was all of a sudden, I was the cash cow. And he was like, I don't understand. She's like paying you to go to Connecticut to like make photocopies. I said, she has a job. I get it done. I was like Roy Donovan. I was the fixer. I would do anything she needed. And what I learned, because I wouldn't take the job, but I was often in these meetings where she would hire these very senior people from very fancy companies. What I quickly began to realize is that we'd get in the room and we would be brainstorming or trying to solve a problem. And everybody else at these big companies said was, I don't have the resources. It can't get done. I'm not really sure I can make that deadline. And I would come into the room and I would say, well, should we decide if it's a good idea? And if it's a good idea, then can we problem solve how to make it happen? And so before long, whatever crazy project she had where she was worried about the politics or somebody not getting it done, she would just put me on the project. And then I would just make sure, hell or high water, that the project got done. And it was such an interesting lesson because it wasn't like I was a great finance person or whatever. I was like a dog with the bone. You put me on it and I made sure that ball did not get dropped. And then getting that fee just was transformative because the next time somebody called me for a full-time job, I was like, yeah, I make $500,000. I mean, I just was crazy. Those words were crazy to come out of my mouth. But then that set my rate. And I remember the guy who hired me then said to me, I don't believe you. I was like, I don't know who you are. I don't lie, but if you'd like, I can show you my tax form. And it was transformative. So it's just such a good lesson to sort of value yourself and think about how not to be shy, to actually think about what you're worth in the marketplace, which is often a place where women fall short.
Wow. So many lessons from that. Knowing your worth, easier said than done. Knowing your worth, not being afraid to ask for what you're worth, and being able to recognize opportunity and being accountable. And Maryam, we're going to start with you actually for this next piece. We're going to be real now. Not that we haven't been real, but we're really going to double click on this and talk about failure. And I'd love to hear from each of you on what your relationship is like with failure. And each of us has had it. Most of us have had it. And how would you describe your feelings about it? Is it something that you find to be just an enemy? Is it a welcome friend? Is it complicated? Is it a friend with benefits? Would love to hear how you.
I mean, I was an immigrant kid who came here and sort of like, never fit in after, sort of leaving our country in some ways. So I would say failure was like the name of the game. I mean, I showed up in middle school having gone from Iran to Paris, and I joined everything. I was the worst bowler. I joined the bowling team. I clearly was not worried about being cool or failing because there I was. And I guess what I would say is I've now as an adult sort of deconstructed how I have a relationship to failure, which is that I don't view things as an obstacle. I view them as an obstacle course. And in some ways that was a gift, but it was also a survival mechanism. It allowed me to sort of detach myself when things didn't go my way or people said crazy things to me, where I could just sort of swipe right and be like, I'm just focused on solving the problem. So, what you want to call me Khomeini, because like whatever, you're ignorant. Like, okay, I'm just gonna swipe left and try and like join the bowling team. You know what I mean? And so I think I sort of lived with failure on a pretty regular basis. And I think you learn more from failure than you do from success, right? So if you can actually embrace that and not be afraid to take risks, inherently in taking risk is failure. So in some ways, that's really the place where you learn the most, although it's emotionally quite taxing. But if you sort of view them as sort of just a part of the obstacle course, like you're on Survivor and you're just trying to get the prize, you sort of develop a different sort of relationship to it.
Anyone else feelings on that?
Yeah, I can give you a couple. If you want innovation, you have to unleash failure. You have to give people permission. So they know people that work with me that I say to them, do it wrong. And they go, but no, do it wrong. I can't do it wrong on PBS. I have to do it perfect. No, you have to be unleashed. You have to fail quick and fail cheap. You gotta let people know that you can take a chance. And if you're the person who goes, no, oh, did you do that wrong? You won't get innovation. So if you want to grow and do something really cool, make it okay for people to fail and talk about it publicly.
No, and if you're in the market, you have to make a call. And so I meet so many women who have, but I know all the information. I knew more than this person's like, no, you need to make a call and you need to make it quick and fast and funny and interesting. And it's a 30-second elevator pitch. And you're not always going to be right. But you're going to have to take that risk. And when you're wrong, you need to own it. I was wrong. This is why I was wrong. Or this is like, you think I'm wrong, but I'm still right. Just give this more time. You've got to be able to explain it and articulate it. But having all of the information doesn't really help you unless you make a call and you own it and own your narrative.
I agree with all of it. And I think it's one of the things where with failure comes something else. And to me, it's been intuition. Because only through experience you actually then develop a understanding of, what can you do differently? What can you start reading the same. What Dolores is really resonates me with, it's so important to emulate that because to your own, as we I think have probably all grown in our leadership roles, the representation of our success is going to be those around you. And if you can't impart that, then you're not going to be able to rise to the occasion. You're not teaching others to do it as well. And so emulating it and putting it out there, super important.
So not even just individually, but as leaders, ensuring that you're emulating it. And there's this saying that if you're not failing, you make risks. You not be doing enough. We're going to switch gears and talk about networking. It came up a bit in some of the discussion earlier, but would love to hear, starting with you, Dolores, on how you approach networking and how often you do.
Sure. So first of all, network in the things that interest you. Okay. Just go into some different networks and try them. So I'm part, as I told you, of a women's CEO organization. We go all around the world. So by the way, if you guys think to get into the C-suite is tough in the United States, try going to some places that I've gone around the world. We are in a great position with the resources that we have. Could we be better? Absolutely. But there are some places where there are a lot tougher obstacles to overcome. The other thing is, I'm part of networks and I just try them out to see if I like them. Right now, I'm on the Black Archives board. I am not Black. I think what they're doing is really interesting. And they think my perspective is really interesting. So what? It's a great network. Try what interests you. If it interests you, go for it. And then go into these networks and try to get into, if you can, leadership position. Go up within the organization. Because when people say to you, okay, you're part of the lobbying arm for PBS, I'm part of the APTS board. Well, I'm the chair of the board, and that helps you. It helps you help other people. It helps you when you try to go into other networks. So go into different organizations and go up the chain.
Great, great. Anyone else have an insight on that? And what guidance would you give to others looking for advice on networking?
I think one of the hardest things for networking, because I'm in this transition right now, and my everyday was fake for me, and people was talking to people want to talk to me because everyone's trying to sell something that they want to sell to Neiman Marcus. And it's been, the last 30 days have really been an open playing field. And one thing that even I still am learning to do is making that connection afterwards. What does that follow look like? What is that intentional conversation I'm going to have? And that does take practice. And right now, I'm really more engaged in areas that have not been my core. I'm not networking in retail networks as much. I'm actually networking more in like children's education and women's health, which is something totally different from what I've been doing that are areas of interest to me. And it really just takes practice and and the chemistry needs to be right, the timing needs to be right. But you put in that effort, but don't get discouraged. Because even sometimes I'm like, I really clicked with that person, but I want to get to know them better. You have to make the moves but use intention, have something there. And I always kind of keep in mind, like, what is the takeaway I'm looking for? And also, what can I offer? Because really great about networking is that there's so much reception to people wanting to provide help and also people who want to receive help. And I think that really is the crux of what then makes it successful. So just keeping some nuggets in mind, but just knowing that it's also not going to be a smooth.
And I just tell people, whether it's networking or mentoring, you need to do it intelligently. So, I mean, if somebody just comes up to you and says, I want to network, or will you be my mentor? You have to have done, your homework on that person and how you add value and why there should be a two-way relationship, instead of just saying like, oh, I want you to, do this for me, without sort of giving it, a context. And particularly like if we work in big organizations, like the number of people who sometimes will just come up and say something like that, but not have any context that has any direct application other than that they've just met you. So I just tell people to, my own children, like you need to do it very intelligently about what you bring to the table, what you learned about them, how you've learned to sort of make some kind of connection that's meaningful.
I'll give you 3 great resources for networking. Heidi Roshan, who's one of the big VCs out in California, was such a great networker that they actually did an HBS case study on her. So if you Google her, you'll find the case study. It's excellent. She really talks about value exchange. And the other one is Keith Ferrazzi has a book called Never Eat Lunch Alone. It actually helps you figure out how to have conversations with people and think about it as relationships versus networking. And the third one is Feminist Fight Club by Jessica Bennett. And one of the things that she talks about is having a feminist fight club, really just like a kitchen cabinet of people that you sort of go up the ladder with. So it's not just necessarily looking for somebody to be your mentor, but actually having a peer group of people in different industries. It's funny, Ellen Futter was president of Barnard when I was here, and she had this group. And so she had started it in her 20s. I ran into her once at a restaurant. They were all together, these women. But by this point, they were like in their 50s or 60s. It was Anna Quinlan, Leslie Stahl, Ellen Futter, right? But when they started, they were all just students. And each person just brought in a different person. And I ended up starting, it took me until my 40s to start that. But 6 of us would get together every quarter. And what was amazing is everybody was in a different field. Somebody brought somebody new. So somebody's a publisher, somebody's in the film business, somebody's a writer. And so people would just be able to say, like, I'm negotiating a contract. Does anybody have any ideas? Or, Judith would show up with her books and hand them out, and Frida would be like, oh, I might want to option that, right? Like, don't think of networking as just up and down. I mean, you actually can help each other along the ride. It is not a zero-sum game. And I guess my biggest thing about networking, because I always found that word a little bit, it just felt transactional for me, is people who are really good at it, they actually consider it a relationship. I mean, it's not a transaction. You're not just trying to get something from somebody. You want to have a relationship before you need help, right? Because otherwise, that's a hard thing to land.
Yeah, and the other thing too, you guys may think as mentees that you don't have a lot to offer. My mentees, I learn equally from them. Please understand, there's a lot you guys have to offer. So you may think, oh gosh, I'm just taking. It's not the case. I learn a lot. So don't be shy about that.
Great segue to mentorship. My son is in the audience, and he and I are giving each other the eyes because we were just at dinner last night talking about I found a mentor this week. I was having a conversation with someone who actually beat me up about a couple of things. He's a very senior partner at a PE firm. And I said, oh, I was so excited. I said, I think I found a mentor. And my son asked, what do you mean? This guy was like this to you. I'm like, no. It means he cares. And he's actually giving me feedback. Well, what do you have to offer him? And I said, well, I'm not sure yet, but it'll be something. Did you ask him? I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. I'm not going to ask, will you be my mentor? It just happens. It happens organically. Like, I don't understand. So hopefully you're paying attention. This is great. So on mentorship, and we're going to start with Joyce on this one. What roles specifically have mentors and or sponsors, because I do believe there is a difference. I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Have they played in your leadership journey? And there's also the concept of a personal board of directors, which has been touched upon. Those words haven't been used. That feminist fight club perhaps is that equivalent? But if you want to touch on one or the other, we'd love to hear about the role that they play.
Yeah, no, so there is a huge difference between a sponsor and a mentor. I think young people often really confuse that. So a mentor can be somebody where it can be a sounding board. You go to them for advice, and it doesn't have to be the most senior person. So if you are like, an analyst, it could be a senior associate. If you're an associate, it could be somebody at the next level who's a VP. It's not like, oh, I go all the way to the top to somebody who's on the operating committee. But that's somebody where you are comfortable enough with them. And that's why I'm saying it's not that there has to be that much of a gap where they can be a good sounding board for you, that they can kind of try to guide you through something that they've been through before. A sponsor to me is someone completely different, particularly if you work in like Wall Street or some of the big consulting firms. A sponsor is somebody who gets you to the next level. And you treat a relationship very differently on a sponsor than you do with a mentor. So it's not somebody where you just kind of go to them with when you have a question about something. You're thinking about a sponsor as somebody who can help you get to the next level. So therefore, you need to pick and choose your moments and the way that you take their time, and what you show them, and why their sponsorship is really warranted in you. And I feel like so my long time sponsor, and I would not call him the mentors, the president of JP Morgan Chase, Daniel Pinto, who's Argentine. And he has the most unusual background. He started working at Manny Hanny at 19 years old and somehow became the president of JP Morgan Chase. How unlikely is that to become the president of the biggest bank in the United States if you started in Argentina, went through like Mexico, worked in all these other places, but we worked on emerging markets together. And every time there was a big opportunity where he got promoted, I knew he wanted to see if he thought that I was ready for it, even if it was a market I'd never looked at, running the whole thing, doing something global. But that's completely different, in my opinion, than somebody who's a mentor. The second thing I say to a lot of mentees is you have to be mentorable, right? I mean, so actually just coming up to somebody like, and you made a very good point, saying, I want to be, I want you to mentor me. You don't do it that way. That's just not the way that you actually build a relationship. So it is about how you build a relationship. But I also agree that some of the best mentors I've had are the people I know will be really honest with me. So my first interaction with them wasn't necessarily that favorable. And so like in research, my longest time mentor is retiring soon. And I know he's the person who will be the most honest with me. He met me. He was so skeptical. He asked me the hardest questions. We didn't get along for the first year, but I came that all of his feedback was right. And I needed to hear that other people wouldn't tell me, as honestly as he did. And that to me was like, he would probably never even say I'm a mentor. He would just say like, I was like, your biggest fan and your biggest critic. And so I think that just the word mentor can get used all kinds of ways. Those are just some important things to remember.
Other insights, especially on what it may mean to be mentorable. I think that's insightful.
I never really felt like I had a mentor. So, I was like, where's my mentor? I didn't really have that. And, it's kind of one of those things where I was always looking for somebody to do that. And my husband was like, why can't you just do that for yourself? It's such a guy view of it. But I was interested in what you said, because the last role I had in sort of more of a corporate setting was at a startup, at a tech startup. And in tech, they believe in a lot of radical candor, which is a very different way of functioning at a job than what I'd ever been used to before, which is immediate feedback 24/7. Right. And so what struck me in your story is that you were willing to take that feedback where somebody else would have thought, like, screw you, like, we're constantly criticizing me, I'm going to go find a different job or whatever. And so the thing that's interesting in tech is that you don't, I actually, like, I learned things from it, even though at first it was sort of uncomfortable, is that technically most companies do performance reviews on a cycle. And so you're getting your feedback 6 months after the fact. And 6 months after the fact, you're like, you remember 6 months ago when you did this? I mean, it's actually so not helpful. So the thing that I sort of learned in tech was that people would give you this feedback, but they had a framework in a way to give you the feedback in a way that you could digest it without you getting defensive. Now, you can choose not to accept the feedback, but actually hearing the feedback can be really instructive. And getting the feedback real time is actually much more valuable because you can actually use it as opposed to having people brew on it for 6 months. And who knows how many opportunities you lost while they were holding on to that. So, I guess what I would say is in a lot of ways, you get mentorship from people you work with, right? And so it doesn't have to necessarily be this really high bar of going to identify a mentor or have a mentor ask. If you are open to feedback, and I will say you also have to know who not to take feedback from, because, there are people who give you feedback who actually have terrible intentions. So, there is that parsing, but I do think having sort of that mindset of, even in friendships or relationships, when you talk about things when they're happening or when the temperature is down and you can hear each other, it's much better than waiting, sort of for these formal processes that used to exist in these big companies. Not so much in tech.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, we're talking about mentorship and sponsorship, and Mary, were you saying, right? I think it's hard for me to say who was my mentor. Also, going through at one point divorce and infertility and having kids a little bit later in life, a lot of my peers and even my direct reports became my life mentors. How to mom, how to figure it out when their kids were already teenagers and kind of in different phases. They've gone through their divorces or different health journeys, and it just becomes more of who's going to help guide you along whatever it is and whatever moment you have. Or as a sponsor, I can specifically be like, they help me get that promotion. They helped me get introduced to a different area of the business. They took a risk on me and a chance on me to cultivate. But mentorship is so much more wide, and it's not hierarchical, to your point. It doesn't have to be the king and the queen of the castle, or a knight, anoint you and knight you into something. It feels so rigid, but and I guess what I love is even the conversation you hear words like networking, you hear words like mentorship, and you have this Webster dictionary definition of it. And it's just so much more than that. But each of us probably have our own special journeys of them defining what then helped us really get the benefit out of it and how to give it back.
Yeah, let's talk about the terrible intentions feedback. Let's talk about that. So I'm telling you guys, first time. So the first time I was up for president, the feedback I got, two quotes, I'll never forget them. Number one, being president, that's a man's job. Verbatim. And I was like, I got an Irish temper, and I'm like, I probably am red now. And then the second one that I got, and I was very young at the time, was, what do you think people would say about a young, attractive female CEO? Now you got my Irish side. And I was like, I think they'd say it's about time, fellas. Get the job, guys. But what I did say was, I'm going to fix this. Because I'll tell you, if there are no women on the board, it is very hard to get to the C level. It's just a fact. I wish it wasn't the case. You need to pay it forward. You need to be a woman on a board. Pay it forward. And I strategically found women that I said, listen, I need you to serve on this board. And then I ended up being voted in president at that board. Because I was like, I am changing this. I am not having it. And it took a long-term strategy to do it. But I was going to change it. And so for me, that was fire. I was like, oh, I am motivated. I am not having this. And so I just kind of used it strategically. And there's people who I actually, to this day, I love them and I'm friends with them. And there are women who are very successful, but I was not happy. So don't take feedback like that. Be like, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix it.
Fired up.
So there's that. Yes.
You got somebody who's mad.
That's right. Amen. And so there's you're reminded of a point that Stefanie made earlier on developing that gut and that intuition, and over time you'll begin to be able to discern between the good feedback, what resonates was true, and the feedback that hurts and makes you angry because you know it's not true. You know it doesn't fit. It's like a bad pair of shoes, no. And you'll be able to toss it aside. And the way that I've been able to know who the sponsors are is those are the people that advocate for you when you're not. Those are the sponsors. Mentorship is far more vast and can come from many different places, and they may not always stay the same. Mentorship, someone can be a mentor, you may outgrow them. Sometimes you surpass them, especially when you're high achieving, it can happen. Part of the navigation. And as you guys were speaking, I was just looking at the title of the session, the Navigating Leadership and Change. It is a navigation. There's obstacles sometimes that you have to get around, and we just identified several. So let's Stefanie, we're going to come back to you on our next topic of personal branding and how we each show up and want to show up. And I'm going to just start and ask each of you just to briefly describe your leadership styles in 3 words, and then we'll come back and dig in a bit more. But what would your 3 words be?
Okay, I want to deviate. There's 2 things that I've kind of determined, especially is also the time of transitioning where I got a lot of feedback and love notes around what people appreciate about my leadership. And there's this mix of what I call fierce grace and confident vulnerability. And the way that it's just like really balancing, like how do you get some SHIT done, but in the most humane possible? That's fierce grace to me. And confident vulnerability is I have to stand before my team and show confident. I want to show you the days that I just am reeling as a mother, as a wife, as a girlfriend, as a daughter, whatever it might be, because I know everyone else is going through life too. So just really mashing it all together. That's how I show up as my whole self. And that to me is most.
So you all probably have the pleasure of doing 360-degree feedback. It is not easy, my friends, because you learn a lot. And in doing that kind of feedback, first of all, I think a lot of the times, most of us are more critical of ourselves. So you end up being like, this is what I thought I was. And so the feedback that I've gotten when I've asked, when I'm at my best, I'm collaborative, I'm open, and I'm strategic. Being open. Be open. It's very tempting a lot of the times if you're leading our organization to say, no, we're going here. But guess what? The person right to your right or to your left knows how to get there better, or actually knows that there is where you really got to go. So you got to stay open and really give a team and build your team. That issue of collaboration, if you're not a team builder, and if you don't lift the people around you up, you're not going to get far. It's an old African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, together. It's really, really true. Actually.
Yeah, so my 3 words are direct. And I think for a lot of people who work in finance and consulting, I mean, you just have to be direct. Adaptable, so that pivot when you need to pivot. And I would say strategic also, that you've got to say the reason for the meeting is to make a decision, leave a plan, have a strategy, and that's why we're here. We're not here just to talk.
Well, I'm going to borrow all their words.
Very high sense of urgency.
You know, I sort of feel like the world's on fire at all times. And I mean, I think part of it's also that I have a lot of energy. So I think people who work with me sort of recognize that like I'm sort of on all the time, but I don't expect that necessarily from them because I recognize that's kind of not the norm. And I pretty much have always been sort of you get what you see. So it's pretty authentic, sort of like you described. You sort of see the good, the bad, and the messy pretty much the whole way through. I was never pretending that things were perfect because it's to get to the places that we've gotten, or it's difficult, and you're sort of juggling a lot of things and making a lot of choices and chapters sort of along your journey. So I would say, you know, there's no separation between my personal and private life. So you didn't need to wait to COVID to see like the crazy stuff behind my screen. You just got to see it if you worked with me. And I would say, I've left a lot of jobs, so you know I've gotten a lot of those cards. And I think the thing I'm most proud of is people saying, you helped us see that the impossible was possible. Because we took on a lot of difficult things where, you know, it was really difficult. And I remember a boss saying to me, like, well, if you can't make this work, you won't be here, but I will. And I remember thinking, like, oh, is that motivating? But, you know, again, I sort of was able to like push that aside and sort of go towards it. And I really wasn't sure if we were going to be able to do those things, but I sort of was able to have enough suspension of disbelief to just go for it anyway. Sometimes they didn't work, but often they did. And I think the team then began to believe what was possible. And that's actually a pretty energizing thing.
Yeah. I hear a lot of vision in that. Double bind is the notion that women can't be too aggressive or too weak. And it's a paradox often that can be found in leadership styles. How have, and anyone can jump in on this one, how have you encountered that in your careers? What advice would you give to those of us who will encounter it?
I think you've got to be you. You know, I got to tell you, like some of the leaders in my organizations, you might meet them and think, wow, that's a shy, really introverted person. That's not a good leader. They're not. And you've just got to be true to who you are and work hard. You know, I'm somebody, and you probably figured it out already. I'm going to tell you what I say. That's me, right? And you can get me at 3 a.m. I'm going to be the same way. But be true. I don't think necessarily that you can be too aggressive or too shy. You just have to be yourself and have the self-confidence to say, sure, I can do this. Why can't I do this? And try to get people around you that support you with that. And say, yeah, you can do it. Come on, of course you can. You need that network to help you.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
I think something Joyce you were saying earlier, I think is, you know, also being Asian American and Chinese descent, I have a lot who are, you grow up more meek, you grow up more like, so be quiet, you know, don't stand out. And so to me, like there's that and the double paradox of being a woman that resonates with me and with my family. Like my mom used to say, be like, be more women like, we just be like, okay, I don't know what that means. What's my legs? And just be one like woman like. But she meant like, don't be so loud, don't be so everything. You know, that's the culture that she grew up with. And so finding my voice, I didn't find my voice until much later. And it doesn't make me actually really help me find my voice because at one point I was like, you were treating me awful. Like, I cannot stand this anymore. But you know, just the experiences of getting there, I think there's testing around to it. I do think like just finding that support. So find a person that can help you put yourself in a place where you may be struggling with. But that also requires you to dig deep and say, this is what I need to work on, what I have. Fall victim to it, find a way to own it authentically, and then own it with purpose to break that mind because it will be there. Some other paradox will happen because the world is complex and there's a lot of different emotions. But I think just being, again, intentional about what is it that I'm trying to do and finding the support goes a long way. So.
Yeah. So, one thing I would just say is that sometimes it's your manager who needs to be educated. So I remember when I started at JP Morgan, they're like, they put together something called like the Asian Task Force. Why don't we have enough Asian women who are managing directors? And they're like, oh, Joyce, you're in research, so you write for a living. And there's this like process where it's a 2-page form and it's an independent reviewer and you have to list like all these references and then everybody meets in a committee, and whoever reviews you can't be somebody who knows you and all of this. And so they gave me all these forms. Here are some people who didn't get through the process. And so I read the forms and I circled, I said, look, this is a 2-page form and you've written 3 times. This person has no presence. Like you said, oh, they work hard, they know their stuff and all this. They can just work on their presence. I said, this is a 2-page form. This just be the pinnacle of her career. So I think we're part of the problem. And you may not realize it because it's not intentional. And even so, that was years ago, but even just this last year, I had a woman who's Japanese who did make managing director. But when everybody was doing the reviews, they're like, oh, she's so Japanese. She's not like Western Japanese, like the other Japanese women we promoted. And I was like, come on. I mean, she lives in Tokyo. I mean, she is Japanese. I mean, her numbers are like completely different. So then I called up again, time to call the manager. Look, you gotta, work on this. I mean, because it just isn't, this is not an out of body experience for you, that somebody's just kind of putting this out there. You need to be part of making this happen.
So many thoughts went through my head as I heard all of you speak. The first one was, I remember a boss once saying to me, oh, you must be really emasculating to your husband. I mean, or actually even made some comment like that to my husband. I really love those. And then I think the other thing is I sit on a public board. And I remember the first time I went to the meeting and, it was an old boss that I hadn't spoken to for a long time. That's how I sort of got on it, which is often how you get on a public board. And I was the only woman on the board. And I got there and they'd sent out a memo because they were taking board headshots. And they said, women wear this, men wear that. And I showed up and I said, why don't you just write Maryam? Because we're the other women. And nobody laughed. But I sort of feel like you have to speak up, right? But I say that as somebody who's 55 or 60, whatever it is. Like, I feel like it's my job now to speak up. And I probably spoke up maybe not more than I should have, or more than most when I was younger. But I sort of feel like in order to make change, you have to use your voice. It's not going to just happen. Nobody's just giving up power. That's not how it's going to work. And so you have to find a way to use your voice in a way that can be heard, which is a little bit about being a sociologist and reading the room and sort of understanding the cues. As we were talking, because I've had the opportunity of working in media and hospitality and tech, I will tell you they're very different kinds of cultures. And so sort of also understanding as you think about your career journey or the next pivot you want to make, the kind of culture that you're going into. I mean, tech was a very different culture. I mean, I sort of felt like everybody was on the spectrum. So, and I say that jokingly, but it was actually kind of true. But so as a result, you got a lot of direct feedback 24/7 because they didn't process things the same way. And so I worked for somebody where I could have said anything to her and she would have never taken it personally. But anything she said, I was like, wait, what did you call it? It just didn't process that way. So I think you have to also recognize that where you work will actually have implications for you. And so in tech, there are not that many women. So they would have sort of women in tech, affinity groups because it was difficult to be an engineer and be sort of in a culture in the tech world. So I think you have to sort of pick where you're going to make your mark and then figure out if you have enough presence, if you've arrived someplace like you have, to then call that manager and say, like, well, what are you saying? And I think one of the privileges of having gotten through the pain of getting to this point is it's my job to speak up now. Mm-hmm. And so the only way it's going to happen is if we all use our voice. And I know it's harder at some points to do that, but where I can, I'm going to use my voice because that's kind of the privilege of age in some ways, or whatever success looks like. So there's Rita. Hi, Rita.
These are my class. Hi, Rita. Carmen.
I can't even remember what the question was. And
on using your voice on social media. Thoughts. What does that look like? Being me, expressing myself, putting my personal brand for the world to see.
Yeah, I'll start with that because, as my daughter will attest, I'm on social media more than she would like. And I was a CMO, so marketing was sort of in my DNA. What you put in social media will stay forever. So you really have to think about what you're going to say on social media. By the way, you're really going to have to think about what you say, just period. But on social media in particular, because it gets screenshot. So even if you delete it, it can be somewhere. So, you know, I definitely use my voice and talk about a lot of things in different places. I definitely had a column for a while on LinkedIn, so I definitely talk about things. But I'm conscious of the times when I actually have that conversation. So I took a pause after my time at Hyatt, and I ended up writing an article about taking a break. And I remember at the time when I wrote the article, it sort of just flew out, and then I sent it into the Times. When they called and said, "Can we buy the story?" there was this moment of pause of like, I mean, of course I was like, it was the Times, I was really flattered, but I was like, am I really putting that out there? So you do have to sort of really process that. That being said, I do think it really matters to understand that you are a brand. The days where you would go into a company and stay there and they would take care of you and you would have a pension and you would retire on that, those are over. They've been over for a while. So you are a brand and you move around, and you don't have to think of yourself as a brand. Think of yourself as your reputation. The minute you move to a job, what people do is they go on LinkedIn and they look and see who they know in common with you. And they say, "Oh, you worked with Maryam. What's she like?" That's your brand, right? So it's not even so much about what you post on social. It's just remember, we're like in a very connected world. And so I definitely talk a lot about things on social, but I'm conscious of what I'm gonna what I'll foray into and what I won't foray into. But my brand is also a lot about just being authentic and sort of sharing the messy journey. So it's easier for me than I think for most people. But today, when you're looking for a job, people check out your social media. They've been doing it for a long time. And a lot of hiring now happens, through an algorithm on LinkedIn. So particularly for, earlier in your career. So you really have to be conscious of what you're saying, how you're saying it, and then sort of understanding sort of the mechanisms of the tools that are out there, including social media.
I think something interesting. So I'm originally from New York. I lived in San Francisco by coastal, and I live in Dallas. I live in a very different political environment than where I grew up. We'll just say that. Being an officer at Neiman Marcus, where I have a pretty large following, a lot of stakeholders, I have a lot of employees that look up to me that listen to my voice. I had a personal social media account and also a work social media account. On the personal one, I would have lots of pictures of my dogs and my babies and everything. So people are like, "Oh, so cute." But during the elections, I did put on my story that I voted for Harrison. And my communications team actually called me and said, "Stefanie, I know this is on your personal, but just realize they're going to feel like you're alienating them." So I had to take a real pause of like thinking that it's not just, I didn't say, there is this mindfulness now. There's a lot of division of thought of belief structures. And where I did find myself having to take a pause moment and say, how do I balance what's my authentic voice, but also how to be an inclusive leader? And I think that is getting harder from many perspectives. But at the end of the day, what was important to me was actually addressing that in one of our meetings and saying that, like, I just want to own this. And I want you to know that this is my view, but I'm going to respect your view. And as a leader, that's what I'm here to stand for. So finding that balance, and Maryam, you can maybe give me some advice as well. Like, it's hard. It really is getting harder, I find, to think about how to, all the things we're saying, stay true to yourself, stay authentic, build your voice, find your voice, use your voice. And also really think that voice may come across inclusive, and that also may not in service. So work in progress for me, obviously.
The one thing I just want to say is if you ever have a question as to whether or not you should post that, sleep on it.
Yeah, so I am one of the global research ambassadors for LinkedIn for JP Morgan. My LinkedIn is for compliance channels. And my daughter looked at it and said, "Bob, you're not even trying to be interested." I think I'm the oldest one on this panel as well. So that's really the only social media that I end up doing.
So as CEOs, you don't get personal. I don't get a personal email. It is negotiated in my contract. Things like I cannot be affiliated with any political party. I cannot attend certain things. I cannot vote certain things. So when you are a CEO of an organization, which I know all of you, if you want to be, will be, you have to give some things up. At least in the industry that I'm in, I'm happy to do that. I'm comfortable doing that, but you don't get some freedoms. And you also have to be very careful in certain industries like mine about what's posted and what your staff are actually posting. So we have pretty tight policies on that. But if you're in a certain position, you don't get a personal page. That's just the way it goes.
We are at the moment where we can open up for Q&A for 1 to possibly 2 questions before we wrap up. So I will ask in the room if there's anyone who has a question. If not, I have many more questions. Yeah, okay. There's one, and then I see 2. There is the lovely salmon colored shirt.
I was just wondering if you have any advice for women who are over 50 how to pivot and how to do the advice you're giving to young women, does that still apply?
I think it does, right? I think that you can pivot at any age. I'm pivoting now. Like I officially, last year I ran Fortune's Most Powerful Women. And then at the conference, I was like, I'm going to go do something else. And, you do think about that because people say to you, like, I take my age off my resume. Like you do hear those conversations as you get older. But my belief is like, you hear about all these people who wrote their first book at 50. So for me, that's sort of always a noise in my head where I think anything is possible. And so I think there's ways to do it. And there's tons of examples of people who have a passion and they go for it and they decide that they're going to do something else. And I actually think you get better with age. As long as you're willing to be a lifelong now than I was 20 years ago. I just have more grace and trust and just more perspective. But I also think you have to be willing to be a lifelong learner. Like you can't pivot if you're gonna just sit in your bedroom and do vision boards. I say this all the time to people. Vision boards are great, but you got to get out into the world, right? It's not just going to come to you. And the second thing is you have to be willing to learn. AI is here. If you are not trying AI and using AI, unless you're going to go be a baker, even then I think you're going to have to learn AI because you're going to have to post on Facebook or something. You have to be adaptable and continuous. The growth mindset is key to being able to pivot. And so we're our own worst enemies when it comes to that. But is it possible? 100,000%.
Thank you. You all have established the importance of building relationship. For startups, how would you suggest building a relationship, especially with people you don't see, like your target audience? So with marketing, what is the best advice there? Because I feel like it's easier when you're talking to them in front, like one-to-one, but when it's through a screen, it's very to know what are their needs, how do I communicate to them? So I'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you.
I feel like this falls into the research category. No, I mean, look, I think that, I think you have to do your research to sort of figure out, I feel like with a lot of startups that I talk to, they're not sure who their target audience is. And so you sort of have to go through a process, who is the target audience? And then I need a group where I am, actually getting the feedback that would have a range of representation for who I want the users to be. And so I sort of tell a lot of startups, they need to treat it, not just, oh, I have a great idea. It's just really okay, you're doing a marketing ad. Who is the core group? And I just did this client survey and they're like, oh, okay, Joyce, what is your client survey? Who answered this? It was kind of interesting. It was well, the average person who answers my survey is Generation X white guy. It's 20%, for finance. So I said that this actually makes a lot of sense to me as far as what I think their what their mindset's going to be on how they look at the investment environment. But I do think that even if you're a startup and you don't have direct context, you have to have sort of your own vision about who it is your audience, and find a way that you kind of reach out to that and get their feedback.
We'll take our last question up front, and then remember, we're still here afterwards during the cocktail hour to answer any questions online.
This. We've spoken about authenticity. We've spoken about being able to pivot women. And then we've also spoken about where the line draws in terms of political speech. We're now living in a climate where, at least in my personal opinion, we've gone beyond politics. And now we are having conversations about whether women's affinity groups should exist, whether minority affinity groups should exist. I am the proud child of immigrants. I am a woman. I am Black. I have always showed up for women and people of color. I'm an attorney, so I'm in a space where there's simply not a lot of us at all. I'm very used to being the only woman, the only person of color, the only immigrant in the room. How do you reconcile advocating for those people while also still, I don't want to use the term towing the line, but being conscious of being inclusive when some of the values are flying in the face of who we are?
Yeah.
How do we reconcile that? Because yes, want to be inclusive, but also if I have a junior attorney who's saying, well, I don't think that firms should have a group that, advocates for women to become partners. Less than 20% of women attorneys are partners at law firms, large law firms. Less than 4% are equity partners. Facts are the facts. Like, how do you reconcile those situations?
Yeah. So thank you, Claire.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Claire. You're touching on issues that are very much close to all of our hearts, and definitely in a careful and thoughtful manner. And it's more than we can unpack here. To be very honest. From a leadership perspective, it's important to for us to do what's authentic and true for each of us. As an attorney, as you know, we have to do what's legal, and we have to do what's right for us individually. And I think I would welcome you to have conversations during the cocktail hour, but here in the room, I think we have to leave it at there. But just know that this is definitely a topic that we all care very deeply about. Thank you.
The one thing I would just add as you were asking that question, because I think about this a lot, I think it's personal. Like, I think there's a line at which it's personal for you. And so I think in my head all the time, like, where will that line be where it won't be something I will be able to be quiet about? I just think it's personal. Like, I think there's a lot to unpack, so I don't want to, leave this big conversation. But I do think in the end, everything is personal.
Law school graduates are women. To the partner level, the attrition among women is extremely high.
Yeah. So, guys, think what I'd like to do now is to thank you. Is I'm going to ask the. Did we agree to do the call to action after you or before you? We're gonna. Okay, so before I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give you all a thought around how to step up into your next step, just a word of encouragement. Before I hand over the mic to each of you to do that, I'll give you a moment to think about what that might be. I want to say a huge thank you to the Columbia College Women organization, to the thank you to Nancy, to Margaret, to Liz, and to Andy, who did an amazing job wrangling all of us. That was a feat in and of itself. So this evening would not be possible without her work. So thank you. Thank you guys very much.
Advice or takeaways. One thing they're embracing is journal. Write things down. When you live in such a digital world, there's just something very different and psychologically proven of pen and paper and what it does for your cognition, your memory, and ingraining everything. Journal your moments, journal your hardest moments, journal your joy moments, but find ways to add that. You'll live it for yourself, you'll live it for yourself, and it doesn't to give to others too.
So be grateful for your network. Karen is my college roommate, Carmen. We lived in the same dorm. Donna McPhee does so much for Columbia, my class as well. That network, you guys, if you look to your right and to your left, honestly, like join arms with these folks. They can help you. They will help you more than you will know. And it's such a blessing. So be grateful for what you have. It's an incredible university, and you all have a way of really helping each other. So pay it forward and really be armed with each other.
Yeah, so I would just say don't take it personally. I don't know if it's a market, it resets every day and embrace change. But I also will go back to, because I'm a researcher too, not journaling, but everyone says, like, why do you still take notes and write everything down? I said, because I really process it better and write better as a result of doing that. As a research analyst, I said, I know that's really old school and I'm old, but I think it's really true.
I'm going to leave you with you deserve joy. Joy. Like, find things that give you joy. Life is short. If we haven't walked away from that in COVID, find things that give you joy. And if that means pivoting and doing things that are uncomfortable so that you find the thing that gives you joy, if it takes journaling, like, find things that give you joy. I think it's really a good thing to remember that we actually deserve that in life.
I know I'm standing between you and some lovely reception, food, and networking. Thank you. What an inspiring and amazing conversation. Please give our distinguished moderating an insightful and uplifting discussion. I could for hours. You may have other things to do, but I was sitting with bated breath. Before we transition, I'm going to pick up from Maryam. Relationship reception instead of networking. I would like to take a few minutes to thank our guest speakers, Columbia College Women Board and team, and alumni staff for making this incredible evening possible. First, a big thank you again to our incredible alumni guests, Dolores, Maryam, Joyce, Stefanie, and Stacie. Share your experience and invaluable advice with all of us. Next, I want to express my sincere appreciation to the committed and passionate Signature Event Planning Committee, and I am going to ask you to stand and wave, chaired by Columbia College Women's Vice President, Liz Yuen. Liz, thank you. Steph Goodsell. TJ Gibbons is not Ms. Core, Margaret Robinson, our President Emeritus. You did your hand wave so that folks can appreciate it and thank you during the reception. I also want to say a very special thank you as well to our partner in planning and bringing this special evening to life, Thandi Jarrett Abdullahi. Amazing arm-in-arm partner in so many things, Columbia College Women. She also partners with the Columbia College, the broader Alumni Association, and a deep, heartfelt thanks, Thandi, for just bringing this amazing evening to life. Thank you so much. Others on the Columbia College Alumni Relations team who've made this evening set up and flow so smoothly. Just a big wave, Samantha Thelmus, Rosandy Valdez, Maggie Kuhn, Alyssa Lorenzo, and Emily Fink. And thank you to all alumni, students, and guests for attending this evening's gathering. It really means a lot to see so many welcoming faces, my classmates of the college and business school, big wave, gals and guys, CCW board members, our students, and all of our guests. Thank you for continuing to support Columbia College women at a time when being in community matters so much. Finally, if you wish to stay or get involved with the Columbia College women community, or if you have any questions about how to make a gift to in support of the CCW scholarship, please reach out to us at ccwomen@columbia.edu. That's where you can reach me and many. Let's now get on to our relationship reception. Let's get it started. Thank you again, everyone, for being here tonight. Thank you. Okay.